Good evening, teacher.
Good evening, Juanita. How are you?
Fine, thank you. I wanted to let you know that Fernando is not going to be able to join the meeting because his baby has already born. So he's at the hospital with his wife.
Okay, thanks for letting me know about that.
Okay.
I'm going to wait that two more students join us before we start.
Okay, teacher, that's fine.
Good evening. Could you please tell me if the sound is okay? Okay, thank
Yes,
you,
I
Juanita.
can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, I think we can start, and the idea tonight is to review some concepts that we didn't have the time to check in our last encounter because we lacked of time, and then to review the reading that you had last week about listening. So, Jairo and Sebastian, I would like you to please tell us what you remember about our last encounter, our discussion. What do you remember about it?
Teacher, if I'm not wrong, we were talking about how to grade students in their oral performance, how to help them uh, develop their oral skills, and how to help them also maybe become more fluent in their speaking or less shy, and try to express themselves as better as they can. That's what I remember. And we discussed a little bit the Common European Framework descriptions or criterions, and if they apply to certain levels or not. And we discussed that some, according to the level, the criterion should be different because the, the skills evaluated are different. And according to what I remember, we also shared some ideas or some ways to help students uh, lose their tongue. I mean, some activities that help shy students to just give their opinions or participate more actively in a class. That's what I remember.
Okay, thank you. Which other ideas did we discuss last encounter?
Well, maybe not asking them to speak in front of the whole class, but having them participate in a conversation with their peers in pairs or in groups, small groups. That was one idea I remembered. Also, not correcting every single mistake they have because they feel uh, um, afraid of making more mistakes, and that will help them. That is, if we don't correct them every single mistake they make, they will feel more confident to produce language more accurately and maybe more fluently.
Okay, that we focus more on, we focus our discussion on grading. Uh, well, Jairo wrote, we talked about the different aspects we take into account when developing listening skills. Also, we talked about the different formats of tests and evaluations. We mainly discussed about this exercise that some of you used. There was a video of a teacher who was testing two students of a university, and those students had an A1 level, and there were three tasks during that test. The first task was an interview, the second task was the description of a picture, and the third task was a role. Do you guys remember what we mentioned about those tasks? Well, we said that, okay, the question is, do you remember what we talked last encounter about the three tasks, the interview, the picture description, and the role play? In the video that you watched about the teacher testing two students that had an A1 level and that belonged to a university, what did we say about those tasks? The tasks of the test. Jairo, you raise your hand.
Okay, hello everybody, good evening.
Hello, yes, we can hear you.
Uh, all right, what I remember is we wanted to check if the tasks provided to students and the rubric that they used and we were supposed to use to grade students would somehow be accurate in deciding if the level of English of students, the performance in the language, would somehow qualify as a certain level in the CEFR. But we started from that point and we ended up talking about how some of the classmates, did not agree with the formats, or they didn't feel comfortable with the types of tasks. Um, we 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 said that when talking about standardized exams, as you would do for any proficiency exam, those types of tasks, language tasks, will be common, especially if you wanted to check a very specific level of English. That's what uh, oral examiners would have to do. Then every classmate provided a different ideas and possibilities and versions of those tasks to make it a little bit more real. So we talked about how difficult it would be for our classmates to implement those strategies, since they didn't feel those activities or those tasks will be common to a user of a language. So we thought, if it's far from real, what activity could we use that a regularly any user of the language could encounter on a daily basis? Uh, so somehow we talked about describing pictures, but then we said, okay, why don't we have them go to the mall, pick a person, and talk about the person, real time, real language activities. We also said that maybe we could provide students with different magazines and ask them to choose what they would like to wear in a given situation. So my recollection of the talk last time was, how can we be accurate in assessing the level of English auto production students, but providing a more meaningful, a more real, a more close to and normal use of the language? That's what I can remember.
Very good. Thank you, Jairo. So the discussion last encounter focus on regarding the tasks, focus as you mentioned on how real they are. As you mentioned, we said that the three types of tasks used in the video are also used in proficiency tests like IELTS. That the type of questions that were asked in the video that you watched were probably not very real, not very close to reality. So one of the discussions that we had last week was about that. Then we also had a discussion about the use of this rubric. So we mentioned, or we were discussing, if this rubric was appropriate for assessing the student's oral performance. Do you guys remember the conclusions that we got about that,
Oh, yes.
Jairo?
Okay, let's see if I can answer that. Um, this rubric was a somehow designed for a very specific level of proficiency. And then the question was, can you assess different levels? Or do you use the same rubric to try and get enough language to determine if a student gets that very specific language in the CEFR? Some of our classmates say that they will be able to use the same rubric to evaluate different levels. And then what the teacher was trying to elicit to help us understand is that very specific levels of proficiency would take into account the same skills, or actually the same component of a skill. However, the descriptor we should be very careful when designing the descriptor, because in terms of what students can do, in terms of the performance, basically in terms of the kind of statements, uh, a user in a very specific level should be given a very specific descriptors. To round it up, what I understood that Teacher Diana was trying to explain is, um, you when you design rubrics for a specific level, what they contain is very specific performances, very specific understanding, very specific language productions that you expect a B1 or a B2 should be able to produce. However, you can have the descriptor and have adaptations in complexity, uh, maybe in the use of language use. It has to do with we were talking about sentences and simple sentences, compound complex sentences. What I got from that discussion was, in terms of the skill and in terms of the aspect or component of skill, of course, you should be assessing students in all grade levels and in all of proficiency levels. But then what you should change and be very specific is when designing the descriptor. Because suppose talking about structures, a student in an A1 level, the descriptor should somehow try to identify if students are using complete sentences, simple sentences. Whereas if it's a C1, students should be able to control a broad range of grammar structures. So it is the same skill and the same aspect of the skill with a different descriptor.
Okay, as we talked about, as you mentioned, that this rubric could be used for different levels, that taking into account what students are, the level of students. However, although if we use this rubric and if we improve the scripture or we make it more specific, it doesn't mean that it's gonna help to avoid the subjectivity of the readers. That was the objective of asking you to use a rubric with the video in order to find out if your scores, if your grades were similar or different. Why? Because some of you could probably think that it is very important that an A1 student uh, perform accurately, and probably you think that it is less important. Some of you might think that it is less important if the student makes some mistakes regarding pronunciation. So the subjectivity when we grade written performance and oral performance is is still there when we use a rubric, or and when we don't use a rubric is even higher the possibility that the difference between the grades of two teachers for the same student can be higher, the difference. Um, we already also mentioned that this is not the rubric to be used in all the contexts. That we mentioned that the rubric, this one, was created by a group of teachers who belonged to a language center and who believed that the most important was to give students a high, or to ask students to be accurate, and that the skills of pronunciation and vocabulary, using correct vocabulary, were less important than asking students to be accurate in regarding the structure they use. So we also mentioned the difference between analytic rubrics, like the ones that we see here on the screen, and holistic rubrics. Do you guys remember about it?
I do remember. I'm just looking to my notes about holistic.
Well, again, the idea of the exercise was to help you experience that by using a rubric, you might also have different grades, because when we grade a student's oral performance, we don't only need a rubric, but we also need the knowledge of of how much, or not how much, but we also need to have the experience of teaching that level that we are grading, that we are scoring. because that gives us the knowledge of the students' usual performance in that level. I mean, if a teacher who usually teaches advanced classes uh, and doesn't teach beginner students, tries to grade the basic student's oral performance, is probably going to have in his mind what the advanced students are able to do when they perform orally, and probably is going to be very um, strict by the time he grades, for example, students' structure or the vocabulary that the beginners are able to use. Because what the teacher has in his experience is the knowledge of an advanced student. That happened in the context where the rubric that you have on the screen was used. In that context, there was a first grader and a second grader, or scorer, or grader. And then sometimes the second grader was a teacher who had experience teaching higher levels. And the difference between the first and the second grader was huge, was an important difference because of what I'm telling you. The information that the teachers have when they teach an A1 course is different to the experience that teachers have when they teach an advanced course. So in order to reduce a little bit that difference, um, it is important first to agree on the rubric that is going to be used. And second, it is important to use it or to have to pilot it several times in order to find out what is that aspect that some teachers um, consider important more than other aspects.
Teacher Diana, sorry, were you asking a minute ago about holistic?
Yes, we were like recalling information of the last encounter, and we discussed the difference between analytic and holistic rubrics. Do you remember that difference, Diana?
Um, is that also a method of grading as well, holistic grading, or is that different?
Well, what we discussed last time was the difference between analytic rubrics and holistic rubrics. It's like the instrument that we can use in order to assess a student's oral performance or written performance. Does any of you remember the difference between those two instruments?
Okay, so basically what I remember also is that it's an overall assessment. Basically, it's a system that has in mind or bears in mind different aspects as well, not only just one element, but different aspects of the quality overall when you use a rubric or this holistic rubric.
Okay, so in the holistic one, we have all the information of all the skills in the description. So what we see here on the screen is the division of the skills and the details for each skill about what could be the performance of the students. If it's very good regarding phonological control, so it is because the student is clear and fluid and it is easy to understand the person. So if this one is divided into 3 skills, but the holistic one is not divided. It has all the information about all the skills in the same descriptor. So I would say that, for example, giving 1 point or 5 points to a student, it will be, a student that is graded 5 is because it's clear and fluid and use answer the question completely and give details, and also his structures are accurate. So if a student is rated with 4, it's because the person has some pronunciation mistakes. Um, there is some information that is not relevant, and the structures have some mistakes. The structures used for the student um, reveal some mistakes. For example, Jairo wrote, holistic as all parts are important and need to be considered and rated since they all add value to the whole. Okay, in my experience, using holistic rubrics is easier than using this rubric that we have here on the screen, because it takes more time, like to give details about the mistakes that students make regarding each skill. Anyway, uh, using the rubrics for both, uh, any rubric, holistic or analytic, requires some practice, so that you pilot them and see if your coworker, for example, gives the same student a similar grade that you also give him. And we mentioned the reason why it is important to agree or to have those training with other coworkers. Do you remember why?
Sorry, teacher Diana. Is important. Can you repeat the question? Is important because what?
Yes, no, the question is, if you have in your school or in the place where you work the rubric that you see on the screen, why is it important to be trained, you and your coworkers are trained for using this rubric? Why do all the teachers who belong to the same context need to be trained on the use of the same rubric?
Obviously, this type of rubric is used to give a overall judgment about the student ability or about the student work. So all the students, in order to be able to give that judgment, or the teacher needs to be familiar with each aspect of each element of the rubric. Otherwise, the result is not going to be right. It's not going to reflect the effort that the student made, I suppose. So if the teachers are familiar with this type of rubric, with all the elements, they will be able to give the score that the student really deserves, and it will be easy if they are familiar with the information, and the overall judgment will be fair and right.
Okay, I'm going to read Jairo's answer. He wrote, to be able to assess students accurately and avoid subjectivity, it is just not fair that the score of the level of proficiency of the student depends on the view of the examiner. All right, so the actually is to reduce the level of subjectivity, because in order to assess students' listening and reading skills, we can have, for example, true and false questions, or open questions, but the answers that we are expecting are usually the same. Well, when we grade students' oral performance, the level of subjectivity is higher because, as we mentioned, some teachers can value more that students um, speak accurately, and some students might value more that some students do less mistakes regarding pronunciation, for example. So it is the idea of being trained with the same rubric in the context where we work is to reduce the level of subjectivity. Okay, so this was a review because we need to reflect, we need to discuss some concepts that we didn't have the time to discuss last time. Some concepts like, I'm going to write them here. We have formative assessment, summative assessment,
Formative.
and types of tests. We have placement tests, proficiency tests.
¿Qué faltó, Silvana?
We have achievement tests, diagnostic tests. So last time, for example, Diana told us that in the place where she works, she only has 80 students, and I say only because most of teachers at schools have usually 200 students in different courses. That she was telling us last time her experience in the place where she works, and she mentioned that because of the vision in the school where she worked was different. She didn't use like tests, actually written tests, but she used different ways to assess her student improvement. That in most of the places where we, in most of the schools, in most universities, in most of the places where we can work, we have written tests and oral tests. And we have a difference between formative and summative. Can you please, those of you who are teachers, would you please tell us the type of tests and assessment that you use in the places where you work?
Teacher Diana, formative assessment is one that I use because it's one that gives students the feedback. It gives students some feedback about their progress in the course, and it may help them to improve their performance.
What is the difference between formative and summative? Because in both you can give feedback about the progress.
So summative assessment is like to round things off or to make a one-off measurements. So for example, this is the type of test that we use at the end of the year, the exam that the students take. But the formative one is like to measure the progress that a student is making during the course. But the other one is just one-off, to round things off.
Okay, so one is ongoing and the other one is after a certain period of time. So the first one is the one that we do every class when we see if students are having problems with pronunciation or with the topic we are studying in the lesson. It is all the time. While the other one, we usually use tests, written tests, oral tests, at the end of a certain time, at the end of the year, at the end of the period, at the end of the unit, at the end of a term. Right?
That's summative. Summative is the one at the end of the year.
Exactly.
One off.
Okay. So usually we use both, right? Although we don't give a grade in formative assessment because it is all the time during all the lessons. We sometimes don't give a grade for that type of assessment. We do it all the time. Well, we usually give a grade for the summative assessment, the one that is after a certain period of time. Does any of you use anything different in the places where you work? And it is, and I wanted to listen to Diana, but she's not with us tonight because um, she uses a different type of assessment. I don't know if I mean, Sebastian, Juanita, and Jairo, do you use a different type of assessment?
No, teacher, because I'm not currently teaching. I'm taking care of my baby right now.
Okay.
But I used to use the same assessment that Diana, the summative assessment.
Okay. Sebastian and Jairo, thank you, Juanita.
Yes, I do use summative assessment at the end of some terms. Um, well, basically, we have midterm exams or final exams, which test students' abilities in the contents covered in 2 or 3 units. And of course, the formative assessment is also used at the institution I teach at because it provides feedback. So the student has the opportunity to know, to learn how his or her progress is going. So I think it's very descriptive. It's not only up to grades numbers, but for them to know their real performance.
Okay. Jairo, thank you, Sebastian. Jairo, do you use any different type of assessment? Okay, Jairo. Okay, Jairo use the same. Well, so for that type of assessment, we use some instruments, right? In this case, or most of the times, we use tests. So for summative assessment, what type of the tests that are listed here we usually use? Achievement test, diagnostic test, proficiency test, or placement test.
Diagnostic tests are really good because they basically paint a picture of what the students' weaknesses are. So they expose the learners' difficulties. So they can tell the teacher which areas they have to work more to make the students' skills improve.
Okay, if we measure students' weaknesses and strengths with diagnostic tests, when do we usually use those type of tests? When during the whole year or when during the course? If we want to know how much students know
Could be at the beginning of the
at the
year to
exactly,
see what knowledge the students already have.
exactly. So it is used at the beginning because we want to know how much students know or what students know and what are their weaknesses or what are their lacks so that we can teach during the course what they already they don't know, what they don't know and they are expected to know. Okay, what about achievement tests? What's that?
Proficiency test. Are you asking for a different? Another one would be a proficiency test or a portfolio assessment.
Okay, we can also have portfolio assessment, but what is achievement test? I am sorry, I had problems with my connection. Do you hear me?
Yes, it's okay now.
Okay,
We can
thank
hear you now.
you. Okay, so the question was, what does achievement mean? Jairo wrote, I guess diagnostic tests also help teachers to spot strengths to start working with a strategy to empower students. Exactly. So regarding diagnostic tests, they are also used for that purpose. And what about achievement tests? What does achievement mean? Juanita?
Are you asking about achievement test, or are you just asking about what achievement?
Both.
With
Both.
both?
Yes. Or if you know what is achievement
What
test?
do you mean? What do you mean about, like? What do you mean when you ask about achievement? Like, what does achievement means? Like, as a word?
Yes.
Okay,
How,
so for me, achievement means uh like the things that the student has to achieve, or I don't know, to like to I don't know other way to say, like you have to they have to get into some level, for example, of knowledge, and when they do so, they are achieving it. So for me, achievement means when students uh, when students are in the level that they are supposed to be, in the level of knowledge that they are supposed to be.
okay. Any other idea about achievement or achievement tests?
It shows all the good points. It shows so far all the things, all the skills that the students have earned, or all the things that they have been able to accomplish that they understand already.
So with you mean what you mean is that with those tests we can have a picture of the skills that the students have developed.
They have already developed. That's right. Yeah. All the skills or the knowledge that they have already gotten. Um, Obviously, because this type of test measure the skills and the knowledge that they have gotten so far in that.
Okay. That the students have developed in a period of time, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, I'm going to read Alejandra's answer. Jairo wrote, achievement regarding a goal or objective, how close you have reached or fulfilled. And Alejandra wrote, an achievement test is a test of developed skill or knowledge in the students, usually through planned instruction such as training or classroom instruction. All right, so
Teacher, can we say in a specific area and specific areas? Just a specific point, things that the students have achieved or developed in a specific area.
yes, it is related with objectives because if we think about specific topics, specific skills, specific knowledge, we need some objectives to say if the students were able to achieve them or not. And that is what the test tries to measure. So we usually use in summative assessment achievement tests to see if students achieve the objectives established for the unit or for the term or for the year. Okay, I wanted to review these concepts with you because if any of you is interested in reading about tests and a type of tests and how to design good tests or how to use a rubric or create a rubric for tests, you will find in the literature, in the theory, you will find the difference between these type of tests. Good. So what about proficiency tests?
Proficiency test.
What are some examples? What do they measure?
I'm just looking through my notes.
Sebastian, Juanita, and Jairo, do you know something about the proficiency tests?
Basically, what the proficiency test wants is to measure the command of a language regarding of the background that a student has in a language. Basically, how good they are, the student is in using the language in the day. The language, how good their language use is.
Okay, so if it measures that how well or how well the person can use the language or how good the person can be to use the language. So there are no specific objectives, but there are like different tasks to measure how well the student can speak, read, write, or listen.
In
So
a general way.
in general, yes. So some proficiency tests are TOEFL, IELTS, ITEF,
The
Michigan.
TOEIC.
Okay, so we don't have specific objectives there, but we have tasks that measure general, the four skills in a general way.
La mano. No, porque me dañas la clase, muñequis.
Okay. Then we have placement tests. What type of tests are those? When do we use them?
Which type of test? Sorry. Oh, what did you say?
Yes, what are placement tests and when do we use those type of tests?
At the beginning of a course, when you want to know if the students are A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, so you do a placement test to assign a student a level.
Exactly. Okay, and you see that in those placement tests, you usually don't have all the topics, but just some of them. So the idea is to see if students cannot deal or don't have good answers for basic questions, so they are classified in a basic level. But sometimes happens that students are, for example, not good at speaking, but they are good at writing, and sometimes they are classified in the wrong cohorts because their skills are not equally, they are not, all, the student is not good in all the skills in the same way. That can be good at writing and not good at speaking, for example. Okay, what about portfolio assessment? What is that? What is a portfolio? What do teachers, what type of tasks are included in the portfolio? What is the purpose of a portfolio?
A portfolio assessment is an assessment that learners, that the students or learners do together with their teachers, and it is an alternative to the classic classroom test. It usually contains samples of the learner's work and shows growth over the time.
Okay, so if we put in a portfolio the students' written tasks, then what do we do with that? Or what do students do with those samples?
Mm, let me see. I have in here. I have some notes. Just a second, please. Um. Okay. Let me see. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it in here in my notes. Just a second.
Okay.
Well, in here I have that they can learn, they can identify the strengths and weakness of their own work, and they can do so by reflection on their own work. Um, and in that way, the weakness can become improvement goals. And I also have in here that what matters in portfolio assessment is the quality, but not the quantity.
All right. Good. I'm going to read other ideas
Okay.
written in the chat. I wrote about placement tests. So he wrote to be able to place a student in the right class where he's able to perform and still be able to make progress. And Alejandra wrote about portfolios. She wrote that they are collections of a student's work representing a selection of performance. A portfolio may be a folder containing a student's best pieces and the student's evaluation of the strengths and weaknesses of the pieces. So if they are used to analyze the progress, it's not a summative assessment way to assess students. That is a formative assessment. So students analyze their progress. They see how well they did in the first draft or in the first written task, and how well they did in the last task, for example, of the course, and what were the progress during that time. So if we have 200 students, to be honest, we cannot work with portfolio assessment. We cannot analyze 200 portfolios and see the students' progress. We could have students have the portfolios in order for them to analyze their progress, but it will be in a context where, or in a situations in which we have 200 students, it could be used for the students to analyze their progress. And for example, for them to use that instrument as a way to assess their work. We could have students assess their work and use that grade as part of the class. But for teachers, it would be very difficult to use portfolios for 200 students. Okay, so these were like the concepts that we couldn't discuss last time and that are important. I don't know if you have questions or comments about assessment, testing, and grading.
Thank you very much. It's very clear. I don't have any questions. I don't know my
Okay, then. Sebastian, Jairo, Juanita, you have questions or comments about testing, assessment, or grading?
No, teacher, I don't.
Okay, so we are going to review very quickly the topic of listening, teaching listening, which was the reading that you had last week. We had some concepts about teaching reading, teaching listening, extensive listening, and intensive listening. What's the difference between that? What's extensive listening?
So I would say that extensive listening will usually take place outside the classroom. For example, at students' home or at the car or in a personal MP3 players. Um, and the motivational power increases when students make their own choices about what they're going to listen to, the type of music they do like, or the topics that they like to discuss, for example. The other thing would be that materials for extensive listening um, can be obtained from different sources. Um, for example, via cassette or CD, or tapes, CD tapes, yeah, CDs or tapes, or the recordings that they have of their books, or the or of the topics of their interests. Mm, radio. Let me see what more do I have. Basically, that and that's for extensive listening.
Exactly.
And
Any
sorry, what?
ideas? Any ideas on how to promote that in the classroom, or how do you know if your students are working on listening at home, not as part of the class, but at home, on something that they really like to listen to practice?
Maybe asking them questions about the topics that they like, and how will they mm, apply that to real life, for example?
It could
Maybe.
be some teachers have a part of the class during one day of the week to have students share those like that information that they listen during the week, or that extensive listening that they did. So as a sharing time that could encourage students to work on listening at home.
Okay.
I'm going to read Jairo's comment. He wrote the first one has to do with design learning activities for specific listening soft skills. As for the later one is the exposure to getting natural situations. And one idea he wrote is a movie club. What if we ask the students to select some songs they would like to discuss? So it could be to have a movie club, or to have a part of the class in order to have them talk about the songs they listen to. Okay, Alejandro wrote intensive listening builds general foundational skills, and extensive listening focuses on training training you to apply these skills to a real world context. Okay, good. So in the readings, you also had some examples of pre, while, and post listening exercises. I'm going to share with you some ideas on that so we can review what does a pre, while, and post listening exercises mean. Okay, here we have that one listening one listening exercise could be interview a stranger. So let's suppose that we invite a person to our classes. What
Yes.
can be the pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening exercise? Because we usually just don't invite the guest or invite the person, and we just what is the purpose of inviting the person? What is the pre of inviting the person? What do we ask the students to do while the person is in front of them? And what can we have the students do after they listen to that person?
One of the purpose of the activity of the listening exercise could be for the student to get familiar with a different accent. For example, if the students have always been listening Americans, so maybe visitor is from Africa or from Canada, so they get
Or we
familiar with.
maybe invite Diana Marcela to be the stranger who the students have to interview. So we have British accent.
So exactly.
Okay,
So the
one
students get used to somebody else.
one purpose could be to have students experience other accent. Okay, and what can be if we have the student listen to this new person? Uh, what can be the role of the students? Just listen, or what can they do while we have the person in the class?
They can interact with her, like
Exactly,
get get to know her, or maybe that will help the students to improve their communicative skills.
exactly. So we actually want them to interact with the person, right? So
Yes,
if the students are basic, if the students have a basic level, so we can have the students prepare some questions in advance. Um,
they could be questions of yours, yes or no, or about the age, for example, or the name, simple things that will improve them to speak a little bit better
it could be,
and get to know vocabulary, maybe.
yes, it could be if they have a basic level. If they have more knowledge of English, so it will be probably necessary to have them write the questions in advance. But with the presentation of this person, probably the questions will emerge during the presentation. And after they listen to this person, after they interact, what could be a good exercise? So a post listening exercise.
What do you mean after they interact? Like after they get to know who the person is?
Yes, after they talk to this person, they ask the questions, they listen to the person's answers, the person leaves, and then what activity can we have our students to do with that information that they listened?
Mm, Maybe students can now introduce themselves and talk about a little bit about them and their lives,
Okay, it could
or
be,
maybe their personal interests.
okay, so it could be to have students do a similar exercise, so a similar interview in person, in groups. It could be. Any other idea? This is important because we usually, when we have one resource, when we have a reading or when we have a listening, we usually can have students work on different activities about the same source of information. So we can have students do pre, while, and post activities related in this case with the listening source. Jairo wrote, how about sharing the experience they had when talking with this person? Okay, so probably when the person leaves, they can share with the whole class um, their opinions on the experience they had talking to the person. Alejandra wrote, after the interview, can make a small presentation or socialization of the answers. Okay, it will also be a good exercise. So the idea is to have students practice as much as possible. If we have one resource, we have in this case the guests, so we can have students do many activities. In the reading, you also have other examples.
I'm sorry, teacher.
Diana?
Sorry to interrupt, but I
Please.
think that I'm not listening clearly what you're saying, so I don't know if it's my problem or if any of the other uh of my other of the other students are having the same problem.
I cannot listen also. I cannot listen also, but I just thought it was my internet because my internet connection is really bad. So that's what I have not mentioned anything, but maybe everyone is the same.
Yes,
What about
that's
now?
what I wanted to know because I thought it was my internet too.
Okay, what about now? Is the sound better or is the same? Can you hear me now or could you please tell me if you can hear me? Okay, I'm going. Could you please tell me if you can hear me now? Do you hear me? Diana, Alejandra, Jairo, Bonita, Sebastián, do you hear me? Do you guys hear me?
No, teacher. I don't know if
Well,
it's the internet or
I,
it's just
Is the sound
we
better
can
now?
hear you, but not
the voice is
fluent.
breaking down.
Okay, I got it. Well, I don't know. I'm going to write a question. Do you guys have questions about the reading on teaching listening?
Reading, do you have questions about the reading?
Not really. I don't.
Um, I'm just looking through my notes to see if I didn't get, if I understood everything.
Okay. Remember that it's important always that we use a listening to have pre, while, and post listening exercises, so that we just don't play the CD,
Okay.
or we just don't play the audio and have students work on just listen without any instruction. In the readings, something important is or a
No,
suggestion.
teacher Diana, at the moment I don't have any question.
Okay. In the reading, you had as a suggestion to give students background of the listening, because that helps the students to focus their attention on what they are going to hear. So giving students background is useful. While listening could be have students focus on uh, specific information, like specific questions they need to answer while they listen. And then after listening exercise can be sharing experiences, working pairs, giving opinions, writing their opinions, so that a listening at the end can give students the opportunity to communicate in an oral or in a written way. That's the idea. Okay, so it seems that you guys don't have questions about those readings. Basically, what you also found in that PDF were like more examples on pre-while listening exercises, um, and some techniques that can be used, like pausing the video to have students work in pairs, and other like examples on how to use the resource. Okay, so if you don't have questions, I'm going to stop the encounter now. Please let me know. Email me if you have questions about the readings that you are doing this week.
Okay. Teacher Fernando Campo just wrote us like at 7 p.m. Told us to please let you know that he's recording for some TV program, and he's in the middle of nowhere, so he can't get into the virtual encounter because of that.
Okay, Juanita, thanks for letting me know about that.
Okay.
Okay, guys, so thank you very much, and I'll meet you again next week. Have a good night,
Thank you very much,
and email me
teacher
if you have
Diana.
questions.
See you
Okay.
next week. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Have a good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Bye.
See everyone.
Have a nice Halloween night, yes, Heidi.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye bye.